Good morning, everybody. We are here to discuss the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2018, which would cover the months 1st of October 2017 to 30th of September 2018. I want to take this opportunity to welcome officials from the Auditor General's Department, from the Ministry of Finance, from the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, from the Board of Inland Revenue, and from the Comptroller of Accounts Department. I also want to thank members of the public who are here out of public interest, and I especially thank members of the media who are always here to cover the proceedings of these meetings. My name is Boindra Dutt Tiwari. I'm the Member of Parliament for Caroni Central and Chair of the Public Accounts Committee. I will give other members of my committee an opportunity to introduce themselves and also ask each one of you here to introduce yourself. The purpose of this meeting, that is to say the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, is to have a general discussion with the Auditor General, and I'm glad she is here, and I want to say personal congratulations and congratulations on behalf of the committee to you. To have a general discussion with the Auditor General on the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended 30th September 2018. We will try to determine some of the challenges being faced and look to possible solutions to these challenges. This committee always tries to look at the things that are problems that need to be solved and whether we can find a solution for it. Based on the issues identified, the following key stakeholders have been invited. I mentioned some of them before, but the Ministry of Finance, including the Comptroller of Accounts and Board of Inland Revenue, and the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. The role of this committee is to help the Auditor General, the ministries and departments improve their delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. This meeting is held in public and is being broadcast live on Parliament's Channel 11 and on Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic and therefore participate by email at parl101@ttparliament.org or on facebook.com/ttparliament or via Twitter @ttparliament. I want to take this opportunity now to ask members of the Auditor General's Department to introduce themselves. Then we'll have the representatives of the Ministry of Finance, then the members of the Board of Inland Revenue, members from the Comptroller of Accounts, and then finally the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. So we start with the Auditor General and her department with introductions.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. My name is Laurelie Pujadas, and I am the Auditor General of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, all. Gary Peters, Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning, all. My name is Riola Balroop, Acting Assistant Auditor General. Thank you.
Good morning. Anita Mangra, Senior Legal Officer, Auditor General.
Good morning. Rajkumari Mohammed, Audit Executive 2, Acton.
Good morning, Anna Maria Silly Daly, Audit Executive 2, Acting.
Good morning, Brian Caesar, Acting Audit Executive 2.
Good morning, Alessia Sankar Ramdeen, Assistant Audit Director. Good morning, Neela Dwarka Ali, Audit Director.
Good morning, Vishnu Dan Paul, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Suzette Leachy, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Michelle Durham Kisoon, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Alison Raphael, Chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue.
Good morning, Catherine Laban, Controller of Accounts.
Good morning, Jennifer Lachman, Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Good morning, Joycelyn Thomas Villanusa, Acting Deputy Controller of Accounts.
Good morning, Avanel Brown, Acting Treasury Director, Treasury Management, Controller of Accounts.
Good morning, Vidya Marcial, Acting Comptroller of Customs and Excise.
Good morning, Shuma Thompson-Sukra, Accountant for Customs and Excise Division.
Good morning, Keith Huggins, Assistant Comptroller of Customs and Excise, Acting.
Good morning, Ashida Gibson, State Counsel, Board of Inland Revenue.
Good morning, Janine Karaya, Acting Economist to Board of Inland Revenue.
Good morning, Natasha Barrow, Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Permanent Secretary.
Good morning, Ida Mariana Eversley, Deputy Chief, Parliamentary Counsel.
Good morning, Karen Bridgewater, Registrar General.
Good morning, Chair Augustine Hamilton, Director of Finance and Accounts.
Good morning, Vashti Maraj, Head Legal Services, PS Secretariat.
Thank you very much, and good morning again to all of you. I'll ask the members of my committee to introduce myself. As I said, my name is Boindra Tiwari, Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and I'll start on my right.
Hi, good morning, Shri C. Prasad. Member, sorry.
Good morning, Taharko Bika, Vice Chairman.
Morning, Lester Henry, Member.
Okay, and thank you very much. On behalf of the members of the Public Accounts Committee and the Secretariat to the committee, I want to say a very sincere thank you to Mr. Majid Ali, the past Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, for his advice, assistance, and support provided to this committee during his tenure in office since we have been in office as a Public Accounts Committee. I also want to take the opportunity to congratulate Ms. Lorelli Pujadas on her appointment as the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. This is a very important role and a very important function, and we congratulate you on your elevation and we wish you well. We look forward to a continued work with you and the department. We are familiar with you because we have dealt with you before, and we look forward to a good working relationship. I will invite the Auditor General now to make some brief opening remarks or a statement if she wishes. And, well, we'll see after her statement.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say thank you once again for affording us the opportunity to come together and to speak with the principals that have been invited here to take us forward. As you know, the role of the Auditor General is a very important one. It's a role that deals with oversight and ensuring proper governance and ensuring that we have the necessary information that we can provide to the citizenry, that the matters and transactions taking place in the various ministries and departments are being done in a true and a fair manner. At this point in time, I will be brief. I too want to recognize the previous Auditor General, Mr. Majid Ali, under whose leadership and guidance we were able to put forward this particular report at this point in time. I draw reference that this report is based on an audit of 41 ministries and approximately 25 treasury statements. And it has been done in a situation in where we continue to have a shortage of staff and the filling of the necessary human resources in order for us to really do a thorough oversight process. We recognize that this is a challenge across the board in many ministries and in many departments as well. But for us in particular, it has been a challenge However, we are grateful that in March of this year, we were able to obtain at least 6 officers at the audit examiner assistant level, and that greatly helped us in pushing forward in looking and reviewing the appropriation accounts of the ministries and helping us in terms of evaluating and looking at the treasury statements. And that's briefly all I wish to say at this point in time, and thank you very much for giving us an ear.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pujadas. What I will do at this point is that I will ask some general questions as chair, and then I will pass on to the members of my committee to ask some questions. Now, the first question that I have, based on the report, is that we had actually planned, based on the 2017 report, to invite the Auditor General together with the Ministries of Planning and the Ministry of Public Administration. And actually, because we waited a little bit, we said we would wait on this report to see if there was any further information or modification of the report that was given in the 2017 report on the role of ICT, Information Communications Technology, in the public service. And what we noted in this report is that although 2 chapters were dedicated to that in various ways in the 2017 report, there was no follow-up chapter in 2018. But we did notice that there were comments by the Auditor General on the ISMIS system. We did notice that there were comments by the Auditor General in the report on the lack of integration of elements of the Ministry of Finance, for instance, Customs and Excise, and so on, which allowed various institutions under the Ministry of Finance to operate in silos. And it simply underscored, although you did not address it in the same way as 2017, that there was a continuing problem, and I think one of deterioration of effectiveness and efficiency in the public service, buttressed by the fact that the ICT systems across the public sector was exceptionally weak. And I wonder if I can get your comment on that. So specifically, how come in this report there was no follow-up to what had been stated in the 2017 report? And secondly, do you, on the basis of your examination in order to do this report for 2018, have anything to say about the state of the information and communication system within the public sector?
Thank you, Chair. That's a very tall order.
Well, it's a big issue.
It is a big issue, and I would...
It's an issue issue that determines the difference between a modern functioning bureaucracy and a backwater bureaucracy of a backward state. And that's why it's so important.
I understand, Chair, from the comments from which you made. I cannot speak to what you have just indicated, but I can say that we continue to do IT audits. At present, we have limited resources ourselves in which to pursue that. However, what we try to do at this point in time is to, when we go in to do an audit, if an entity, for example, Customs, Board of Inland Revenue, if they have certain IT functions, we try to look at the IT and look at the application controls that they have in existence and to assess whether those things will actually produce the relevant statements in a true and correct manner. This year, we did do a follow-up based on the resources, as you indicated, in terms of the customs, with a view to really looking at, because last year you also spoke about revenue leakages being an issue.
Sure.
And so what we were looking to do is to link the systems that they have in place to see and link that with the work we were doing in terms of the revenue. And so that was our focus this year, as opposed to a specialized audit that just simply focused. So what we did is we started from the premise of looking at the report last year, and those areas that we were looking into this year, we pulled from that and we did a follow-up in those areas. We are actually at present doing follow-ups in other areas, and at present we will be dealing with that. We have selected certain risk areas that we think that need to be looked at as well, in certain entities that we have identified as possible risk areas, and we are pursuing IT audits in that regard. Further comments, I would like to defer to Mrs. Neela Dwarika Ali. She is our audit director in charge of our IT audit functions.
Okay, well, I'll take those comments before I follow up.
Okay, good
Go
morning,
ahead.
Chair.
Yes.
Based on what Ms. Pujadas had said.
Could I just make one little comment before you respond?
Sure.
The 2017 report recommended that the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Public Administration work together to deal with the integration of the ICT system across the public sector, because it felt that public administration could not do this without a planning oversight over what these ministries as an integrated aspect of government would do. And that is what I'm interested in, really, as to what is the Auditor General's point of view on what has happened in terms of your recommendation, first of all, where the system is now, how much better or how much worse it is, and thirdly, your insight as to what needs to be done. Go ahead.
Okay. I should give you a brief history in terms of why we started IT audits. When we started IT audits in 2012, what we found pervasive amongst all the ministries was lack of internal controls, both general and application. The Ministry of Public Administration, they are the oversight ministry for IT in the public service. However, we found there was an absence in their monitoring and oversight. For example, in terms of an IT security, an overarching security policy for all ministries and departments was absent. There was a draft policy, however, it was never approved. So what we found is that each ministry in silo, they were trying to develop their own policies and procedures. In terms of IT governance, it was also lacking, because in terms of, for example, a BCP, if they were developing a BCP plan, each ministry would do their own engagement of maybe consultants and develop their own BCP plan. We had asked earlier this year for a follow-up from Ministry of Public Administration and Ministry of Planning, but we haven't gotten any response. What we found also in terms of the integration of systems and lack of interfaces, that although ministries were using the same information, they all had separate systems where they were required, of course, in terms of cost. It was very expensive to acquire. And instead of sharing this information, they were all in silos, acquiring different information systems for sometimes same purposes. So there was an issue in that, especially with the limited use of resources at the time, and which still exists. So we were asking that the Ministry of Public Administration should look into this in terms of looking at interface of systems. I will give you an example. For example, the RHAs. In terms of management of pharmaceuticals, there were about 3 systems, different systems being used for the same management of pharmaceuticals.
And that matter comes up in this report again?
No, that is in a separate audit report that we are finalizing. Some aspects of it came up in last year's report.
Yeah.
Yes, so we asked that the Ministry of Health, in collaboration with the Ministry of Public Administration, they collaborate and acquire one system that should be used across all RHAs. in terms of cost effectiveness and efficiencies, in terms of, at the end of the day, making sure that your patients, they receive drugs on a timely basis, or they receive drugs because the inventory is an issue in terms of having an inventory system that does not interface with NIPDEC, which is T40. And these things lack efficiency, so that is what we were trying to get Ministry of Public Administration involved. In terms of Ministry of Planning, they are responsible for approving these IT projects. Now, if you are responsible for approving an IT project, and I am an RHA and I request that I approval for funding for acquisition of an application. Now, in my opinion, I would have seen that, okay, another RHA, they had the same request and they had approved and procured an information system, and it's the same request I have. So why is it that I'm requested for a different system for the same purpose? So in terms of Ministry of Planning, that is why we asked for the collaboration. But to date, we haven't really had any response.
Okay, but are you in a position to offer a view of what is happening in terms of more integrated systems in the public service now?
Okay, but in terms of RHA, we spoke with respective CEOs on what is happening. Eastern Regional Health Authority, I must commend them because they took the initiative to develop an in-house system for the management of pharmaceuticals. And that was the main reason because of lack of financial resources. So it's something that they could look at in terms of spending all this expenditure on a system.
So it's a system that has been developed in-house and can be transferable.
Yes.
And then integrated.
Yes, or interface.
Yes. And integration would allow for a lot of things because it means that if one RHA had a lot of aspirin but another one had none, you could make transfers within the system in order to deal with the need of patients, no?
Yes, because at the end of the day, in terms of service delivery, their vision would be to provide an efficient health service. And of course, that would address a lot of issues that is happening right now.
Okay, what at this point do you have to recommend beyond what you did in 2017, in the 2017 report, which was in 2018?
Okay, in terms of the integration, we have to get IT governance, proper IT governance structure. That is lacking in the public service. We do not have a proper IT governance structure. And if you do not have a proper IT governance structure, of course, your operations would not be effective. So that is our starting point. And we started, as I said, with Ministry of Public Administration because they are the oversight ministry for ICT. So we really need to get the collaboration amongst all involved in the public service for us to move forward. Because as a country, in terms of innovation, we are lacking. And at the end of the day, the stakeholders, which are the citizens, they are the ones suffering.
Okay, so the minimal value, I mean, without looking at all the ramifications and benefits, the minimum value is that first, you'd have a governance structure in which everything is integrated. And therefore, there is shared knowledge. The second thing is that you'd have a more efficient and effective system.
Yes.
And thirdly, it would mean that you can deploy whatever resources and services that you provide to the citizen in a much more effective way.
So at the end of the day...
So even if you got nothing else, that would be the benefit.
Yes, in terms of efficiency and economy.
All right. Thank you very much. I have some other questions, though, and the first question is the one on page 4 of the report, in which the Auditor General flags this item and says, emphasis of matter. And it has to do with the Exchequer account. And the Exchequer account now reads at $40,246,393,438.68. Now, in my appreciation of how this thing has evolved since 2003, this is the highest level that the Exchequer account has reached in the history of the country. And what the Auditor General says later in the document is that this perhaps would preferably be shown as indebtedness on the part of the government. And I know that the Article 4 report of the IMF had also raised this issue of how it should be classified. Would the Auditor General care to respond on this matter?
Just a clarification. This year, we did not raise the issue of it being reported as a debt, primarily because of the formatting and the presentation of the accounts is presented on a cash basis. And if you look at it, the statement that speaks to this emphasis of matter statement is the Treasury statement on the consolidated statements of assets and liabilities. And basically what is being...
What page is that?
Page 109 of the report. And basically what is being presented there is really just the cash element, what is raised, the revenue, your investments, and your expenditure, your liabilities, and your capital liabilities. So in fact, the government accounts is not really presented in a manner that would accurately reflect that this overdrawn balance is in fact a debt. And that is because the government position, we follow IPSAS, and we're doing IPSAS the cash basis. We have not yet progressed to moving towards an accrued presentation, style of presentation. We are still in the formation stage of presenting accounts under the IPSAS on the cash basis. And I think further discussion on that particular component would have to be dealt with between the Control of Accounts and the Ministry of Finance.
Okay, I wonder if I could ask the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance to comment on this. On first of all, the amount of the Exchequer account and the extent of the overdraft, and secondly, the manner in which it is presented in the accounts and whether it would be desirable to do it differently.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning again. Chairman, is it okay for me to just make one short opening statement?
Sure, of course.
Chairman, over the years 2005 to 2019, I've been either a Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance or a Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance.
Yes.
And throughout those almost 14 years, I have never been afforded an exit interview with the Auditor General's office.
Okay.
That being said, I'm convinced that should I have been afforded an exit interview with this report, several of the issues pertaining to the Ministry of Finance would have been resolved before the document was published.
Okay, could I stop you right there? And could we say immediately that given the fact of what the Auditor General's office is and what the role of the Ministry of Finance is, which is perhaps, when you look at the Ministry of Finance and its jurisdiction and its authority, you realize how strong and how widespread that power and authority is in the public service system. Can we make it now a rule where there would be, before the writing of certainly the final draft of the Auditor General's report, that there be some kind of interface between the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance and the Auditor General's office? Could the Auditor General respond to that?
It is standard practice that, in fact, on permanent secretaries in all departments, as part of our work procedures, that we are supposed to conduct exit meetings with them on the points. We have to be careful, though, Chair, that the Office of the Auditor General is an independent entity under
I
the
agree.
Constitution.
Yes.
And so we have to be careful that what we are having a discussion with is the points raised that we have found that need tweaking, that needs improving, and actually maybe material enough to be making it into the report. So that at times, while we agree that there may have been a fallout where the Ministry of Finance is concerned, and I think that is because of the structure that under the Ministry of Finance, you have a number of entities that are in their own right, have their own heads of expenditure. And in that regard, what happens is that the exit meetings would generally be held with that particular head of person responsible for that head. For example, we may have exit meetings individually with the Controller of Accounts. We may have exit meetings with the BIR, the Chair of BIR. We have exit meetings with the Customs, the Chair of Customs and Controller. So that what happens is that I think we have over the years not afforded the accounting officer, and that is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, the opportunity to take part in those exit meeting discussions. And I think we may have erred over the years, and we will certainly seek to address that going forward, recognizing that the accounting officer for all of these entities is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah. Are you acknowledging that it may be desirable to engage the permanent? I just want to be clear.
The accounting officer is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of
Right.
Finance, and so therefore the correct practice is
Would
while
be
we
to
engage the others,
engage.
is also to engage.
I would agree with that, and I support you. And I want to say something about independence. All right? Independence means the capacity to know what you are doing or saying, to engage the other point of view fairly, and to hold your ground, or to adjust on the basis of the act of persuasion, on the basis of reason. To engage the permanent secretary, in my view, does not compromise you, and to listen to the permanent secretary and hear all his or her explanations or pleadings and simply insist on your ground is not to be discourteous. It is to take into account the positions articulated, and because you are sure about what you are doing, to hold your ground. On the other hand, the permanent secretary is always free to explain or articulate or elucidate their point of view, and it is up to you as an independent officer at the end of the day to determine the extent to which that you will take that into account. But I do believe that an interface at that level would be a desirable thing. And I would think that to some extent, with some of the critical ministries, I don't know if it is possible to do every permanent secretary to do that within the space of a single 12-month period. But I would think that with some of the critical ministries, that might be desirable. And I want to say that this is without any attempt at all to compromise the Auditor General's office and the independence of that office. Because once we compromise the independence of that office, the whole game is finished. Okay? So I want the permanent secretary to appreciate and understand that, and I hope you understand my point of view. You wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yes, my comment is I totally agree with you, and I just want to reiterate that it is standard practice at the end of our interim audit phase that we do speak with all permanent secretaries at the exit meeting points. As I said, in this particular case, because we were dealing with the heads, we unavoidably and unfortunately neglected to speak with the accounting officer, that is the Ministry of Finance.
No, and what you are doing is an important thing, because when you speak with the people directly responsible for their things, and the permanent secretary comes to you and says something that is at variance with that, I mean, you have enough information there to make your own judgment.
I think where we will take your point even further, though, because the appropriation account phase is so tight, we have a limited time in which to do the audit, because, you know, at the end of January, it is sometimes very difficult to hold exit meeting points at that point and get the report completed by April 31st. So we will have to try and strategize in some way, maybe an ongoing reporting to the permanent secretaries of some of the things that we have found, so that there would be no surprises at the end.
It is your responsibility to give them an opportunity, and it is their obligation and responsibility to make the time. Okay, so you do not make the time for this, they make the time. Okay, I would like to say that, because or else the roles will be reversed, and I want to insist on the independence of the Auditor General's office. Okay, Permanent Secretary, continue. I hope you're satisfied with my intervention.
Thank you, Chairman. Noted. Just on the issue of the overdrawn balance on the Exchequer account, as you would know, if you run fiscal deficits, you either finance it through borrowing, or you finance it through drawdown on the overdraft. Once you continue to run a fiscal deficit, you have two options. You borrow and you take the hit on the debt to GDP, or you draw down on the overdraft and you more or less drive the central bank to print more money. So you either take a hit on debt to GDP, or you take a hit on potential inflationary issues. The successive governments since 2003 have been using the overdraft facility, and as you draw down on the overdraft, you run up the balance on the Exchequer account. The only way to avoid this is potentially to run a fiscal surplus, where this drawdown will be reduced based on the size of the fiscal surplus. That would be the main way to do it. And it's not taken as part of the debt, of the net public sector debt. Essentially, that's
because it varies.
It varies, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, are you comfortable with this, though, as PS? I mean, asking your independent opinion here.
A permanent secretary and Minister of Finance could never be comfortable with an overdrawn balance on the Exchequer account.
Is never what?
Could never be comfortable with an overdrawn balance in the Exchequer account.
Okay. So you'd rather it not be like this?
I'd rather it, yes.
What would be the choices before you then to avoid such a high overdraft? What would be the choices before?
The only choice is a policy decision to run a fiscal surplus. It would be the main choice.
So that would mean a reduction in expenditure.
Exactly.
A generation of the revenue.
Correct.
That is predictable and achievable.
Correct.
And to stay living within your means.
Exactly. And the fiscal surplus will lead to a build-up at the central bank.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Okay. Questions that I asked took up a lot of time, and I don't want to deprive my colleagues of the opportunity, and I'm sure they have strong questions on this particular report. So I will start with Senator Tahaka, who is our Vice Chairman, and we'll go over to Senator, and then Ms. Sipasad, Senator Sipasad. Right.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all our contributors today. The issue I have is with the Central Bank Act, Section 46(2), as amended in 2017 in the Finance Bill, which in a sense allows for the total amount of outstanding advances to move from 15% to 20%. All right? Now, the overdraft, as stated on page 57, the net credit balance is at 13.65 billion. Am I to be correct if I refer to that statistic as the overdraft, the size of the overdraft? So that's the size of the overdrawn balance, all right? on page 57, under subhead the Exchequer account, where the 40 billion overdrawn balance was referenced, right? So I'm referring to the size of the overdraft facility itself when we net, I guess, the funds that the government has with the central bank. So am I to be correct, Mr. Dan Paul, regarding that statistic?
The Auditor General will have to respond to you, Senator.
Okay, so Ms. Puadas, am I? Page 57. Of course, the reference page is page 109 that you
Yeah, page 109 is the statement of consolidated statements of assets and liabilities.
Right.
I want to draw to your attention that the Auditor General is the auditor and not the preparer of the accounts. And so therefore, the person that should speak to the preparation of the accounts, which is the statement of assets and liabilities, at 109 is the controller of accounts.
So may I engage you? To whom am I? Ms. Laban?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Can you just repeat the question?
So basically, just want to confirm to make sure that we are all on the same page, on page 57, which really summarizes the consolidated statement of assets and liabilities. On page 109, we have a net credit balance of 13.645 billion on page 57. All right? It's the same figure from, right, the cash at bank. Right. So I'm just confirming if we refer to that loosely as the size of the overdraft.
Yeah. Well, the size of the overdraft actually is calculated using the central banks. There's a percentage that central bank would, the overdraft facility we have is 20% of the estimated revenue for the financial year. And the overdraft itself is calculated using netting off all our balances at the central bank,
Right, but
including the Exchequer.
Right, but this dollar value, will I be correct if I refer to that dollar value as the overdraft? Or to which figure must I look?
We usually get an overdraft statement from the central bank daily.
I know, but I'm talking about from this report. From this report, because I want us to be speaking to something that we are all looking at.
Well, it would be a close reflection of the overdraft.
Around 13.65 billion, as at that date.
Yes.
Right. Now, given the revenue projection for the government, which was 47, So I want to engage in a conversation, Ms. Laban, right? So given the revenue projection as at the beginning of the current fiscal year at $47.7 billion, stated in the appropriation bill of the Minister of Finance, this puts the size of the overdraft at in excess of 28%, all right? Which is significantly above the 20%. And based on the Central Bank Act 46.2, it says that it must not exceed at any time this figure. What then is the action that is taken when there's when it's trespassed? What is the action that is taken from the position of the Comptroller of Accounts?
Just to make a correction, what is being used currently is 2015 estimated revenue to calculate the overdraft facility.
No. Because of what? The interpretation of section 46.2?
Okay. If the overdraft wasn't paid off for previous financial years, the amount that central bank will use is the overdraft, is the estimated revenue from that financial year.
But then if the Auditor General is seeing the overdraft, the account has been in overdraft since 2003, why we chose 2015?
Well, we would have paid off we are supposed to pay off the overdraft balances, the overdrawn balances, but since we are unable to pay off the overdraft every year, it has been kept at 2015 until we pay off the overdraft. Then we can use the current estimated revenues.
Very interesting. All right, so I want to move on to a different thing entirely, right? This is really for clarification here. On page 125, I just wanted to understand what I'm seeing. Right, so the promissory notes as at, and I guess I have to redirect to the Auditor General, on page 125, unless I should be the Comptroller. On page 125, there are promissory notes and the International Monetary Fund is referenced, and these go back to as far back as the 70s and 80s, when I'm almost sure none of us would have been in our positions. Just want to, and the sums are huge, in excess of 3 billion. So I just want to find out exactly what does this really reflect. Is this a current status, or is this something that we should not worry about?
Who is that? Sorry.
Again, I wish to draw to the Honorable Senator's attention that the preparation of the Treasury statements have just been reproduced here in the Auditor General's report for reference. The preparation of the statements are and have been provided to the Auditor General by the Controller of Accounts. Again, I would like to draw your attention that the promissory note that you're making reference to on page 125, the statement of assets and liabilities, which would include the consolidated statement of assets and liabilities 109, would include the notes to the accounts. And the notes to the account on page 113 speaks to the promissory note and identifies to you what is the outstanding amount of the potential liability, that contingent liability that can occur. In that regard, at page 113, you would see at subparagraph 11.3, the contingent liabilities in respect of outstanding promissory notes issued by the government of Trinidad and Tobago amounts to approximately $5 billion. And that is based on the reflection of what was presented in the Statement of Public Debt.
Okay. I thank you for that, and I'll get back to this question when we get a response from the Comptroller, because even the $5 billion, it may still cover this $3.1 billion that I'm saying may still be owed to the IMF. So I mean, it'll be something of concern to any citizen to understand who we have obligations to. But I want to just bring my second part really to page 72 of the report regarding the accounts of the Treasury. And we're seeing here a number of accounts submitted. Of the 21 ministries, departments, those heads, 11 of those ministries, departments have not submitted any accounts. Can we explain what is the reason for this?
Senator, these are accounts that we're speaking about are the deposit accounts. Deposit accounts are accounts that ministry would have for specific purposes in which they would have, it's like a bank account, a deposit account, and they are required to submit statements in support of those deposit accounts. And so that is in reference to the deposit accounts, not financial statements per se, but just in specific reference to the deposit accounts held by the various ministries.
And would that bring any, Ms. Puadas, would that bring any concern to the Auditor General's department?
It has concern because we've raised it in the report. What we also are concerned about is basically deposit accounts need to be looked at ministries over time. And if after 3 years, according to the regulations, I believe the financial instructions, if after 3 years it is potential that you will not utilize this, you need to analyze it, you need to look at it so that it can be returned back to general revenue, and you advise control of accounts that accordingly. What we're trying to bring to the attention of ministries and departments, because I think at times ministries and departments, because of maybe the changeovers, the realignments, the alignments, information as it relates to the deposit accounts may have been misplaced, and some ministries may not even be aware that there is a deposit account that is being referenced in the Treasury statement. So what we are trying to do is to bring the alerting to both Treasury and to the various ministries that there is a need to look at the deposit accounts, look at the monies that are in these deposit accounts, assess and analyze the balances in these accounts, and determine whether or not these accounts need to be written back to general revenue. And that was the purpose of presenting it here.
I'll close off with this point here. To me, it is very worrying. We have Central Administrative Services Tobago, the personnel department, but we have the police service, the Ministry of Public Administration and Communications. I mean, a ministry like that should never, that particular ministry should never be in a position where they are found wanting in an administrative process such as this. Housing, community development, social development, and the judiciary. So I think if there is any way we can get redress where this is concerned, it would be welcome. I think I will pass on to the chair.
Yeah, I'll move on to Senator Siprasad, but just before I do, does the fact that you don't have knowledge of these deposit accounts in any way affect your ability to assess the accuracy of the public record for the entire system?
Deposit accounts are accounts that are held for special purposes and they're kept for special purposes. Now, they would be included in some form in the statement of consolidated statement of assets and liabilities. So it is not that the monies are not it is not excluded. I'm just flagging it.
Okay, I'll say that because the mic wasn't on. It's not excluded, just flagging it.
Thank you, Chairman. Coming back to the ICT plan, you'll have to forgive me, but I like plans. I believe in planning. And I'm trying to figure out, do you have an overall plan for ICT development in the public sector? Because to me, if you don't have that and you try to do it on a piecemeal basis, you will run into a lot of challenges and duplication.
Be the representative for ICT in the Auditor General's department.
Okay, in terms of an ICT for the public service, it's responsibility of the Ministry of Public Administration with responsibility for ICT. We are just the auditors of the ministries and departments, so we could recommend, but we cannot be a part of developing a plan.
Do you know if there's such a plan?
No. Is there? Okay, but we don't have any.
Through your chair, there is a national ICT plan that was approved by Cabinet in 2018. It has been launched by the Ministry of Public Administration formally. And I believe at this point in time, they're currently working on the implementation steps for the national ICT plan.
Would this take into consideration the issues and the challenges that the Auditor General speaks of when they're auditing people with different systems that don't speak to each other, etc.?
Presumably so, member. However, I would defer to the representatives of the Ministry of Public Administration who would be able to reasonably speak to their intentions with regard to the rollout and implementation of the plan.
But they are not here today. They are not present here today. So we will have to do what we had intended to do really which was to ask public administration and planning to appear together to see how we can resolve this issue. Now, the way we conduct our business here, we don't get into blame games and so on. We try to figure out what the problem is, and if there's a problem, we have to find a way to fix it, because you can't leave it from 2017 to 18 to 19 to 20, and this thing has been going on a long time. So I think we'll bring those two ministries together to answer some of those questions. Thank you very much. You can continue with your question, Senator.
No problem, Chairman. And probably you could even include the Auditor General, because they will have
we will ask so that
relevant
we can
concerns. Because
do it properly.
I'm just trying to come to find a solution, because to me, there's no sense talking about issues and we don't come up with a way to to address all the issues. The second concern I have is reporting on a cash basis. To me, that just doesn't sit right. Why is it that we still report on a cash basis and not on an accrual basis? Because this tells me that things will be left out that should be included. We might be understating assets, understating liabilities, or overstating vice versa. Can you give me some ideas to when you will be switching to an accrued basis of accounting? Because I think that is a very serious issue that needs to be dealt with.
Senator, thank you for your question. Again, I would just wish to draw that reporting on a cash basis is because the accounting framework is on a cash basis. We can only report on what exists. And the accounting framework has always been on a cash basis. In fact, throughout this region, there is only one country that I know of, well, two now, that have actually moved towards an accrual basis, and that is the island of Cayman Islands and Barbados. And Barbados, in their implementation of the accrual basis, have actually incurred a lot of issues in implementing it. And in fact, even first world countries, America is not even on a full accrual basis in terms of their accounting framework. So, you know, it is a process. It is a policy decision as to what you're going to do. And from our research, it is recognized that implementation of that particular policy decision towards an accrual framework, an accounting framework, can take well over 10 years. Because as you recognize, you spoke of assets. One would have to have policy decision as to how do you capitalize a road? How do you capitalize a bridge? These are your assets. So these are sorts of things. It is not just an easy process to just say that you are moving over into an accrual basis framework of presentation, accounting framework. But again, these are policy decisions that would need to be taken into the direction in which you would wish your accounts to be done.
While I understand that, doesn't mean that it's not something that we should be not looking at. And the fact that some countries don't do it is fine, but that doesn't mean that we have to follow suit. We need to do what's the best for us. And even if it takes a long time, it's something that I think, you know, we should be pushing towards. Anyway, I noted that there seems to be some issues between the BIR and the Auditor General with respect to some issues in terms of recommendations. And I'm concerned that they're not resolved. And I was wondering, one, what were the recommendations made that seems to be causing the issues, and if any reasons were given for not accepting them, and what steps are being taken to come to some ground where people can move on and everybody's satisfied with the results going forward. I'm not sure who's going to answer the questions, but that's a real concern of mine, just reading through the report.
I wonder if I could ask the head of BIR to respond. First of all, what the particular problem is and the reason for the impasse, because I know what the general issue is, and the members of the committee would be aware of that. So perhaps you can explain, head of BIR.
All right, good morning again. The issue is the sharing of information. The Auditor General, in order for them to do all the checks on the accounts, our accounts, they want to look at the taxpayer information, especially for ICT and all these checks. And the law, our law, Section 4 of the Income Tax Act, does not allow us to share that. And that is the issue that we have. The legislation, it was recommended that they be included in legislation to allow them, or to allow us to share information with them, but that hasn't come out. So as a result, we are bound by the law not to provide it.
Can I understand it clearly? The big issue is that you are bound by the law, not that you object to the change of the law. Is that correct?
we are bound by the law, yes. The change in the law, I think it's a governmental policy.
Decision.
Right, it's a decision, yes.
And if the law is changed, of course, you will then abide
Of
by
course,
that
of
law.
course, of course, yes.
All right. And what is the, but I mean, in making a law such as that, any government would have to take into account what the BIR is thinking. Okay. What is the particular objection? Does the Auditor General want to come into the BIR to examine individual taxpayer accounts, or is it to get a sense of the extent of taxpayer compliance?
I'm not totally sure. She will, the Auditor General will have to answer as to why, yes, she will, right. But our concern, of course, my concern, yes, the concern of the Board of Inland Revenue is that the whole foundation of the collection of taxes is based on voluntary compliance. And some of the issues you have with that is that the taxpayers will not want to share the information if they know that many people can see the information. And that's the issue we have. So if you want to share the information that we have with different organizations, you may find that the whole collection process is undermined. And that's our concern.
Okay, I will just ask the Auditor General, what is the information that you want from the BIR? Can you explain it clearly? And I'll pass over now to Senator C. Prasad to take the question in from here.
All right, thank you again, Chair. Chair, we've had over the years previously, because I've been in the Auditor General's department for a little while, we have had in previous years where we have gone in and we've accessed information, including taxpayers' information, and used that as part of our sample. But this issue started, I think, in 2012. In 2012, when we were undertaking to try and get an assessment of, we noted that there were more registrants coming on board for value-added tax. However, we were noticing that the revenue figure was going down as far as value-added taxes was concerned. So the initial request was to get a registration list of all the persons that were, registered for VAT, and also to get a listing of all the persons under the Hotel Tax Act to determine how many registrants were registered, so that we could have done some sort of analytical review to assess whether or not there were revenue leakages taking place somewhere. And we were denied access to that information. Now that's core, because I would want to draw to your attention that within our report we highlighted the fact that revenue is approximately 50 billion. Of that 50 billion, 31.4 billion belongs to taxation. It belongs to taxation revenue. So if one is really to assess whether or not, from a completeness point of view, that revenue that is due to be collected is being collected and there is no revenue leakage, we need to have access to information. Not necessarily, we do not necessarily need to go down and pull a sample to see if taxpayer X is, but basic simple things of registration lists, of pertaining to VAT registration lists, hotel registration lists, and I am not sure how that compromises Section 4 of the BIR, of the Income Tax Act, and how that would impact on their secrecy and the offense that they would be committing in that regard. But basically, that is basically for us to really to be assured that the completeness of revenue collection, we just need to be able to do some analytical reviews. We've had issues in terms of being able to access their electronic system, their information system, and we had proposed that, okay, we don't need to know the persons, you all have identification codes, perhaps you could block out for us, and we would still be able to interrogate the data, block out the information that could specifically identify, and even that was denied because it is perceived to be a breach under the Secrecy Act. Again, from a legal perspective, I am not sure if it is or if it is not, but that is basically our issue.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to take that on at a this is not the forum to conclude that discussion. I just have one question, one last question so far. On page 19, on the analysis of transfers, I noticed that you have a category called other 35%. And I just wondered what category is, or what made up that other figure? What was included there? Page 19 of the report.
Remember, we'll have to get back to you because most likely it will be made up of a lot of small individual entities.
Yeah.
So if you want any details on that.
Yeah, maybe you could send it to the
Yeah.
Secretariat, because I think it's a large number to not know what's included there. Chairman. So,
Okay,
thank
Senator
you.
Henry.
Morning. There's a lot of very provoking stuff that just took place here. And I think I sympathize a lot with the Auditor General in your view of what you expressed in terms of the information and what you need to do your work properly. I think it's highly appropriate what you suggested. I want to start with P.S. Dan Paul. You kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable this morning because your opening statement made me realize I was reading this Auditor General report very thoroughly, and I might be wasting my time. Could you elaborate on what you meant by your opening comment? You don't have to give full details, but just give me one example of what would have been there that is not, that is somehow not properly there.
Thank you, Senator. The opening statement is simple. I've never been afforded an exit interview by the Auditor General. And one of the, if you want an example, that's an issue that could have been resolved. At the BIR, there was a claim that the BIR went over the PS's limit in approving invoices. That turned out not to be true and turned out to be an error on the part of the Auditor General. That's a simple example. Had this been brought to our attention in an exit interview, I'm sure that could have been resolved. Something as simple as that.
Okay. I think that's very important, and thank you for providing the example. But I think that is an issue, again, we will have to take into consideration, and I'm sure you will have that resolved.
Yeah, I should ask you.
I want to move on to the thorny issue that has come up every time we've had these meetings of the integrated financial management information system. Could you give us an update on what is really happening with that? Because when I read the submission from the Ministry of Finance, one of the things that jumped out at me was we're looking at another 4 years before this thing is implemented. On page, well, it doesn't have a page number. It says complete rollout of the IFMAS is estimated to take between 44 to 48 months. And then you list the stages in the ministry submission. What is really happening? Could you give us an update on?
Thank you, Senator. Chairman, just before I answer Senator Henry, could I respond to something that Senator Beaker said on the promissory notes? Chairman, as you know, and Senator, as you're aware, when countries join organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, it's essentially quota-based. In other words, the more quotas you have, the more voting power you have at the board of directors. These promissory notes are essentially capital increases over the years. So every country in the world who are members of these organizations will be asked to increase their quota at these organizations. So it's not that we owe the IMF, it's just an agreement to the IMF. It's not a policy loan or anything like that. It's just capital increases as we move forward.
I'm sure the public, as well as myself, are grateful for the clarification. And again, I guess then that will give a complete answer for the CDB and the other.
Exactly,
entities.
and you would see them there. Yeah. To answer Senator Henry, I just want to put something on the record, Chairman, if it's okay with you. As the acronym suggests, it's an integrated financial management information system, and one of the most progressive IT concepts ever attempted in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, in the history of finance in Trinidad and Tobago. And it can be broadly defined as a suite of integrated software applications which use a central data platform to collect, store, manage, and interpret data from many government departments, providing a real-time integrated view of the core business processes of the government. This enables the government to plan, execute, and monitor its budget, and track and report on all its revenues and expenditure from one database. In other words, you are modernizing the way in which we do the budgeting process in Trinidad and Tobago. What is interesting here, Senator, is that although it's a four-year time period, it's a four-year time period starting 2018. So right now we're really into the second year, and we expect we're going to do a pilot starting with the Ministries of Finance, Planning and Development, Education, and the Tobago Assembly starting January 2020. We expect that pilot to last until July 2020, and based on the success of the pilot, we expect the full rollout to start in the third quarter of 2020.
But could you speak specifically to the issue of the pension problems that we've been having with people getting their gratuity payments and their pension?
And that's one of the major issues I've been trying to solve over the last few years. As you know, one of the measures that we implemented this year is having everyone on retirement receive their minimum pension. That's one of the policies that we implemented this year. What I would like to see, the perfect state, is that you retire today and you get your pension tomorrow. That's the perfect state. The IFMIS is expected to drive this process. And the Comptroller of Accounts will be able to assist me here, because they will be more informed in how that program is progressing as far as the pension is concerned. But it's a major bugbear at the Ministry of Finance. As I said before, I said at this forum that I don't think that it's right to have people retire at 60 and then be waiting for gratuity and pension at 62, 63. It's just not right. And so we're trying to solve that problem. And I expect the IFMIS to make a severe dent in how we treated pensions.
Because one of the concerns I've had over the years is that this IFMIS or something similar to it should have been implemented a very long time ago. So I'm hoping that we don't run into these problems that caused it not to happen before.
The good thing about this, Senator, is that it's as you know, the IFMIS is driven by a loan from the IDB.
Yes.
And because of that, it brings a certain amount of discipline to the process. Because you have the multilateral organization overseeing the project as it proceeds.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, and are you satisfied with the progress that has been done and the work of the consultant?
So far, just to let you know, also we have selected the vendor through using IDB procurement processes, and the vendor is on board, and the integrated software should be in place by July of this year.
Okay. And what about the directive from the minister in terms of getting the file system, the RFID? They said they completed about 30,000 files and so on. Could we, in terms of resolving the pension and gratuity issue?
Yes, that project was completed where over 30,000 files were tagged.
But the claim is that they have 110,000 files.
Well, the 30,000 are active files.
Just the people who are on
yes,
active duty
currently.
in the ministry. So
Yes.
Okay, you started with that. Okay, no problem. I will stop here for now and do a second round.
Yeah, please, follow up.
Thank you. Mr. Danport, would you be so kind as to give the Secretariat a list or a document which outlines the areas that you think that should have been looked at by the Auditor General if they had done an exit interview with you?
Most definitely, Senator.
Senator Tahaka, you have some questions?
Yes.
Please.
So, thank you, Chair. My question again is just a follow-up for the Comptroller of Accounts. So I did some calculations on which refers to the same issue of the overdraft facility, and the estimated, based on the estimates of revenue expenditure, the estimated revenue in 2015, that is the year currently being used as the base year, right? So the estimated expenditure was, revenues are 59 billion, 59.011 billion, before you take into account loans which aren't to be added. When you put the 13.6 over that, you get in excess of 22%. So even if you use 2014, where the estimated revenue was higher, you still get close to 22% in terms of the size of the overdraft as at balance sheet date. So the challenge that I'm having is what mechanism kicks in when the overdraft facility exceeds the legal limit? What mechanism? What tools does the comptroller have that can bring some remedy?
Senator, if I may, the overdraft facility cannot exceed the legal limit. It's set by law. It's 20% of the given budgeted revenue of a particular year, right? To move to another year, you have to pay off the overdraft of that particular year. We are using 20% of 2015, which is 20% of 60 billion, which is 15 billion, roughly.
That'll be 12.
20% of
60 billion will be 12 billion, 12
right,
by 5.
Right. So
at 13.6, we are significantly above it.
Well, actually, the year we're using is 20% of 61 billion. I don't know the exact number.
No, I'm saying even if we go as high as 62.3 billion, which was 2014, you're still at 21.9%. So the point I'm making is that you are over. So we are, as a nation, our overdraft facility is in contravention of the law. What mechanism does the comptroller have?
Well, Senator, I just want to clarify again. I don't know the numbers you're using. I'm not sure what
I'm using a number that was subject to our conversation at the beginning of this hearing, which is on page 109, the 13.6.
But what I will see, and Comptroller, clarify your numbers. What I would see, that you cannot exceed the overdraft limit. By law, the central bank will stop you. In fact, if we get to 99%, let's assume we get to 99%, we immediately get in fact, before 99%, 95%, we get a letter from the central bank stating that we are about to exceed the overdraft and it's not allowed by law. You're just not allowed to exceed the overdraft.
Well, I'm submitting that the overdraft was exceeded based on information here, unless a different statistic for the overdraft is presented, but based on information in this report, we have to agree that the overdraft was exceeded. But and you are saying that the central bank would stop it, so therefore there is no mechanism. The comptroller is not empowered to do anything really. Is really the empowerment really lies with the central bank.
Correct.
So then we should ask that question of the central bank then. The issue that I have really would be with the Ministry of Energy's information, and it's captured on page 33, at the bottom of that page. But on the ministry submitted, excuse me.
Those are official documents, correspondence.
Okay. So the ministry saying that they are looking at initiatives to determine the veracity of production data submitted by oil and gas companies and quarry operators and the feasibility of the same. The issue I have is what is the role of the Auditor General's department in ensuring that the ministry lives up to this mandate, which is ensuring the production data by the oil and gas companies and the quarry operators is true data, because they have come before us in past hearings and indicated that they are not in a position to verify the bona fide status of the data that is given to them by these operators. So what is the role of the Auditor General in facilitating and ensuring they do their job?
Well, the role of the Auditor General is not to ensure of the data, but the role of the Auditor General is to ensure that where there are weaknesses and leakages, to point it out to the ministry, and material weaknesses we bring to the reference here. With that regard, if you take note that we were unable to really to verify the royalties because, again, the information was limited. We are pursuing that again this year to see whether or not there has been any improvements at the Ministry of Energy in terms of capping the leakages that they have identified, they themselves have identified. And so that is on stream for us this year as one of our audit target areas, is the Ministry of Energy, and looking at the controls that are established in the Ministry of Energy with regard to revenue. And so that is our focus as regard for this year. So that is our follow-up action with regard to that. But we cannot enforce, we're not an enforcement agency, and we are there to audit what is provided to us. We are also there to ensure that revenue collected is correct and has been properly brought to account. And we can only do that if information is provided. Now, where they are not doing that, that presents another limitation of scope on our ability to really attest and to give assurance to the public that the true amount of revenue is being collected. And that is another area.
Then I want to ask if the Auditor General Department, because revenue, in terms of profits from oil and gas companies, represents roughly 17% and is rising because the price of oil is buoyant, of our entire expenditure base. It's higher when the expenditure base is lower, so it's about 20% now, when the revenue base is lower. The issue is, can the Auditor General, from the institutional knowledge in your department, provide this committee with recommendations that can strengthen the process for monitoring at the Ministry of Energy, this particular aspect of the output of these energy-based operators?
I think we would be able to do that at this point in time, but what we will do, as I said, at this year, that has been projected, revenue at the Ministry of Energy, and looking at the control processes and looking at the systems involved. Part of our assessment is to assess the weaknesses and the gaps in that regard. So we can provide the committee with that result of that approach after we have completed that exercise.
Okay, would you take this as a formal request for that? We would. Which we will document by letter as well.
It's now included in our program.
Some other questions. I noticed on page 10 you have the issue of procurement coming up again, and then recent developments on procurement. I wonder if this question might better be directed at the Permanent Secretary. If I could read the last lines here on page 11. A final version of the regulations, which include feedback from public consultations, was sent to the Minister of Finance on November 30th, 2018. Subsequently, revisions have been made and the regulations have been redrafted and submitted to the Minister of Finance. Now, in the Parliament, the Minister of Finance had promised the regulations to Parliament around March. And I know in a recent statement, I think at the end of the mid-year review process, he indicated that for a second time, the regulator had sent the regulations for him, for the ministry. They had made some comments, and they're back at the regulator. Do you know, Permanent Secretary, what is the status now? What is happening with the procurement legislation?
Thank you, Chairman. Permanent Secretary Michelle Kisun will
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Chair. So the first set of draft regulations, as you indicated, was reviewed by the Ministry of Finance, a multidisciplinary team, and we submitted detailed comments. Subsequently, we sent comments and we met with the regulator to discuss those issues. And prior to that, I think the minister would have indicated in Parliament sometime that we had received also comments from external counsel. So those comments had been taken into consideration by the procurement regulator, and they have been redrafted and submitted back to the ministry. The ministry is actively finalizing the comments to go back to the regulator to be submitted in the next few days.
Seem to be in the final stages of the process.
Correct, Chairman.
Yeah. The one concern we have, is that this bill was passed in January 2015 and amended twice, I think in 2016 and then in 2017. And it has not been fully proclaimed. Meanwhile, there has been significant procurement initiatives taken involving large sums of money and involving things like boats and planes and other pretty sizable projects that we are not sure, given the status of the proclamation of this legislation and the regulations, that these things will receive scrutiny by the procurement regulator. And I want to register our concern about that particular matter. And we are anxious for this matter of the procurement regulation to be finalized. I want to ask the Auditor General whether, in fact, the fact that this thing has taken so long gives her any cause for concern at all, given the fact that procurement has been going on anyway.
We've had discussions with the OPR in terms of what shall obtain, and we have been advised that the Central Tenders Board Act continues to operate, and in that regard, therefore, any acquisitions or procurement that is being taken place at this point in time must still continue to be in compliance with the Central Tenders Board Act. As part of our standard procedures, when we do the audits, based on a risk-based analysis, we would look at certain DP projects, certain infrastructure development projects, and as part of that, we would look to seek that compliance with Central Tenders Board Act has been maintained. And until such time as the full proclamation takes place, we seek to ensure that the compliance of the CTB Act has been continued to be adhered to.
I hear you, but there's a problem, you see. The Central Tenders Board Act and the reason for the new Procurement Act is precisely because under the Central Tenders Board Act, not everything comes under the Central Tenders Board. And when you have a special purpose company, things can be done through the special purpose company. Under the new Procurement Act, all of this will cease. And every entity, it doesn't matter what it is, must come under the scrutiny of the Procurement Board. And our concern is precisely this, because the whole purpose of the Procurement Act was to prevent things from slipping through the cracks, whether they were government-to-government arrangements or whether they were done by a particular entity that might have been a special purpose company. And therefore, I think that it should be a concern of the Auditor General that things continue to slip through the cracks in a situation in which this comprehensive procurement law, on which we spent years to finalize, has not in fact been established. So that is what I was trying to confirm with you.
I understand, Chair. However, from an auditing perspective, again, I would have to say that we can only deal with the compliance issues and the control procedures that have been administered and in place by the various entities. And in those cases where we would assess whether there's a gap in perhaps a control procedure has not been identified, or they have not established proper authorization levels, or they have gone outside the scope of their authorization levels, they have not perhaps sought, they have maybe selected a sole bidder instead of going through a process to evaluate a feasibility study as to whether a sole bidding selection is the best method. These things are still considered part of your normal audit work, even though it is not included and has not been passed. That is a benchmark for an assessment of proper procurement procedures taking place. And so an auditor would, whether it is the Auditor General or a private auditor in any entity, in looking at a procurement process, would look at those types of activities.
Right. Some other issues I want to raise here. In the chapter 2 of this document, we have two graphs of the analysis of actual expenditure by classification and the current transfers, which are registered at 42%. This is a question for the Permanent Secretary. Has there been any significant change in the pattern of government expenditure over, let's say, the last 5 years? And has there been any change in the any significant change in the proportion of current transfers? Those two questions I'd like to ask. And the graphs are on chapter 2, page 18 and 19.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're aware, on the government fiscal accounts, we moved from an expenditure somewhere in 2015, 2016, around roughly $60 billion. And in 2017, 2018, we were around close to 50 billion, averaging around 50 billion. So that's almost a $10 billion contraction in the space of 3 or 4 years.
That's a reduction, but what about the pattern?
Right. So, and obviously that came out of shifting the pattern on which we distribute the expenditure. One way we did this was we entered into public expenditure review with the World Bank, where they provided recommendations on how we should go about in dealing with the social programs especially. So they investigated or reviewed expenditure in Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Development, and Ministry of Health. And that created a situation where we were able to adjust the level of expenditure in these ministries. Especially in the Ministry of Social Development, as you are aware, several of the programs in the Ministry of Social Development were reviewed. Several of them are now being tested, and there were significant savings there. It's not easy, Chairman, as you know, for any country, more specifically a developing country, to contract expenditure by $10 billion in 3 years. And that's what we experienced. But the main aspects would have been from what we policy decisions of the government would have been in health, education, and in social services. As far as the transfers are concerned to state enterprises and statutory authorities, obviously those have been adjusted also.
Those have been adjusted. I see for statutory boards it's 15%. That's a significant reduction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So there has been a reduction there?
A significant reduction.
Okay. I'll just ask one more question, and then I'll ask my colleagues if they want to pursue any issues. When you look at page 21, we see one of the problems that comes up whenever we have the Finance Committee meetings in the Parliament is that there are significant expenditures allocated for things like contracts for service providers, that for security services, for janitorial services, etc. And they always elicit a lot of questions from the parliamentarians on the day that we meet for the Finance Committee. And this happens in every ministry. And when I look at page 21 here, I see that formal agreements between the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and service providers with respect to rent lease vehicles and equipment and other contracted services totaling approximately 5 million were not produced for audit examination. Then you have no evidence of contract for container examination services for customs and excise. Then you have contract agreements not produced for provision of security services. Then you have formal contracts between the Ministry of Finance and a provider for janitorial and security services, and so on. I just want to ask the Auditor General, I mean, is this just, I mean, like something that happens out of neglect, or maybe somebody forgot or something like that, or is this a pattern in the ministry? Is this a problem?
To answer short and sweet, I think it is a problem in ministries in getting the formal approach in terms of finalizing the agreements and going through to the end to making sure that things are properly documented, the terms are clearly articulated. We have found in most of the times when we ask for a sample to verify what contractual arrangements are in place, most of the times we are not able to be provided with the contracts.
What issues do these things raise, though? When you have people who are doing work, there is no contract for the work that is being done, then you have payments or expenditure to be made in order to satisfy the work that has been done. I mean, what problem does it create for us?
Okay, from an audit perspective, as you know, a contract sets the terms and conditions and the agreement. It would outline the expected service or services to be provided, and it would identify the costs related to those services. At times, we have found in certain ministries, and I wouldn't want to say in all ministries, but in certain ministries, there may be an indication, there is a correlation with the fact that we may not see an evidence of an invoice order even, or a contract in a more formal sense, or an invoice order that specifies, yet still a payment would have been made at some point in time. Now, the extent of that could be that there may be commitments that are going unrecorded. So there may be actually an expectation on the part of a supplier to be paid from monies that have not been accounted for because there has not been an invoice order made or there has not been a formal agreement. And that may not have been reflected in the particular ledger, the vote book. So going forward, a bill may appear for a service for which the accounting unit will have to find the necessary funds to make that, for which no monies was committed, and there was no evidence that there was an agreement for that service to be provided by way of a contract or by way of an invoice order. And so that has happened over time in a number of ministries.
So it creates a problem both for the contractor and for the ministry.
And it does.
All right. Two quick things here. I notice here on page 22, 2.25, at the Ministry of Works and Transport, no documentation was submitted as evidence of evaluation or monitoring in respect of monies transferred to the following entities: Airports Authorities, Port Authority, Public Transport Service Commission. Now, we've had opportunity to deal with some of these entities here, each one of these, and we know that there are problems there. I mean, is the Auditor General trying to flag a particular problem here? I mean, what is the problem that we are dealing with here in these entities, which in themselves, when we examine them, are quite problematic?
Chair, as you will note, and I think by the member have raised that 42% of current expenditure, recurrent expenditure goes out to current transfers and subsidies by way of subventions. Airports Authority, Port Authority, Public Transport Corporation, National Carnival Commission, these are all entities that receive money by way of subventions. under the current transfers and subsidies allocations. We would expect that ministries and departments, given the large sums of monies that are being appropriated to these entities, that certain structures would be put in place, certain control mechanisms that would be put in place, and certain accountability measures would be devised so that you can properly monitor the level of expenditure, and the monies that you're releasing are normally released for a specific purpose. And therefore, we would like to see that ministries take the initiative to verify and to substantiate that the monies are being used for the purposes in which they're being released. And that's one matter. And again, because we have flagged it here, we are not leaving it here. I would like those who are listening in and for the PS that are present here to take note that this year we are embarking upon looking at what procedures have been put in place for monitoring these particular entities who are receiving large sums of subventions money by way of subvention. And so that is one of our audit scope areas this year, that we will be focusing on the level of monitoring that has been established formally to bring to account and to ensure that these entities are actually utilizing the monies that they are receiving for the purposes in which the monies have been released. And that is our audit scope for this year.
Okay, one final question before passing on to my colleagues. On 23, you make reference to the fact, I won't read in order to save time, that there are several ministries in which people below the appropriate level of signatory sign off on checks in those particular ministries. And clearly you're flagging this issue. Besides the business of what you might call administrative negligence, is there any additional problem that goes with these that you've been able to see, or is it just that they have flouted the rules?
I think just from a controlled purpose and authorization level, authorization is one of your highest forms of controls and internal control system that any organization can have. And from an organizational point of view, it is good form to ensure that the appropriate person has the due authority and has been authorized and delegated to perform certain functions. And when it comes to payments and expenditure, we must, as accounting officers and heads of departments, we need to ensure that the right persons are making the expenditure, because
so
that
it just can't be anybody.
It just can't be anybody.
Okay, my colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. This question is in reference to the Customs and Excise Division regarding IT controls on page 31 of the report. And the report of the Auditor General Department points to a number of weaknesses. And to me, one of the most worrying is on subsection 316. The executor at Customs was configured to classify containers at different levels based on risk management units of Customs. However, unless I'm reading it incorrectly, the Auditor General Department was not provided with the criteria that can be used to verify the eventual classification of containers. And then the earlier point stating that among many other things, the lapses can result in revenue leakages. Two questions. One for the Auditor General Department. Was there any way to guesstimate the size of the leakages to the state?
There was.
Okay. And to the Customs and Excise Division, what is the current status of this? And how can this be rectified in terms of providing the Auditor General's Department with the relevant criteria?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So the Customs and Excise Division has a risk management team, and they monitor and review the effectiveness of the selection criteria and report to management on its performance. Now, this criteria is not fixed. It is constant. It is changing every day. It is done day to day with our available resources. The criteria for selection of a particular declaration is based on many factors, but it is not limited to, but includes the nature of the goods, whether it's high duty rates, the frequency misclassified tariff heading numbers, the repeat offenders, trader, declarant with a history of breaches and undervaluation, licenses and permits requirement, such as national security, Ministry of Trade, planned quarantine, any information that we would get from the declaration. This risk management system, again, we are bound by our confidentiality rules. We operate according to Chapter 7801. If, however, the Auditor General needs some of the criteria, that could be provided, but is based on intelligence gathering.
So if I'm to be clear, it is that it is not usually provided, but it may be provided if they request it. The criteria?
The criteria is not usually provided, is what we use in-house based on information and intelligence that we receive. We could sit with the Auditor General and do an explanation as to how we come about with the various criteria, such as how we determine a red lane, a yellow lane, a blue lane. What does that mean, or a green lane? What that means in terms of the criteria and selection.
Then, can I ask the Auditor General's Department, would what approach would work? Would it be a general approach, or would it be a line-by-line approach based on each, I guess, each container? I'm not sure.
All right, I will defer to Mr. Arika Ali on for this question.
In terms of obtaining the criteria set to configure the system in use at Customs, we were able to get some in terms of discussion, but we needed documentary evidence for us to perform our application testing within the system. So maybe we could have some additional discussion with Customs to rectify the situation.
Thanks. And the other question is with Section 315, where it states officers at all levels have the ability to input, validate, and make certain changes on the system, which can result in unauthorized transactions being processed and possible revenue leakages. Can I get any, this committee, get any information from the Customs and Excise Division regarding this conclusion by the Auditor General's Department?
Thank you, sir. Okay, an officer is an authorized user of the Customs Border Control System. The officer has the ability to make changes where they are the officer in charge. So if you are a CN, Customs and Excise Officer 1, you are vested with only some responsibilities. As the responsibilities vary according to your level or according to your seniority, right? All changes on this Customs Border Control System require completion of an inspection act that justifies the change. So before you could go onto the system, you must discuss this change with your officer in charge. The Customs Border Control System maintains a complete audit trail of all the changes made and by whom, because every officer has access to the system and a username. So it identifies individuals. And any version of the declaration, including attachments, can be viewed at any time for any given period.
Thanks. I have one last question, and it has to do with the influx of foreigners, not mentioning the nationality for obvious reasons, because you all know, in the Southwest Peninsula. What is the strength of Customs in terms of personnel in the Southwest Peninsula and in terms of IT support systems for this influx of foreigners regarding the fact that they are trading in goods in a
We don't really have any information on the trading in goods. The processing of the immigrants would be an immigration issue.
Sorry, let me be clear. So, for example, it is alleged or reported that they would barter, all right? So they would bring commodities and they would purchase, they would trade. So a simple example, because I live in Point Fortin, and you would be at your doorstep and a car will pull up and they'll ask you if you want to sell what you have, and they will provide you with electronic appliances that they brought from Venezuela. All right? So to get those electronic appliances in, clearly they would have had to pass through some level of checks. Do you have sufficient personnel in the Southwest Peninsula that can check these things? Or what is the strength, the personnel strength in the Southwest Peninsula?
I beg to differ, sir, but we don't have any information of this bartering, and our staff at the Southwest Peninsula is like about 20 persons.
Scientist Prasad, you have some questions.
Just a follow-up question. A common thread running through this report is that we have rules and regulations, and they have the fleet, talked of contracts, and so on. And it seems, for some reason, some people,
There are rules and regulations, but no control.
but there are no controls, and so people don't follow the rules and regulations, okay? And I was just wondering, from an audit perspective, what recommendations would you, as the Auditor General, have in terms of recommendations to resolve these issues, which, to me, is a flagrant disregard of people's policies and procedures, and you get fired for doing those kinds of things in the private sector? That just does not happen. And, you're awarding contracts and so on and so on. And, there must be some kind of sanction or something to prevent this from happening.
Under Regulation 27 of the Exchequer and Audit Act, the Minister of Finance has the opportunity to surcharge officers who are in flagrant breaches and found to be so. And it is not the responsibility of the Auditor General to surcharge. However, what we are attempting to do is really, as you say, identify this common theme and to really bring it to the fore. Because we have a lot of rules. The rules are not rules by themselves. The purpose of these rules form part of the organization's control system. Breakage and non-compliance with these rules could lead to misappropriation of assets, can lead to things being recorded as an asset and they no longer exist in the entity. So it can lead to an overstatement of your assets. It has a cost element. For example, flagrant, breaches in terms of the control of your gas, in terms of vehicle usage, has a cost element. And we know that we are living in tight expenditure, tightening of the fiscal expenditure at this point in time. And these are expenses that ministries have to put out significant amounts of monies towards. So what we are recommended is that, the heads of the departments and the relevant accounting officers, look at these areas with a view to tightening it and putting in place maybe stronger, not just the rules, not following the rules, but maybe adding to the rules, stronger control mechanisms to give them the assurance that these things will not happen and are not happening, because it's really to the benefit of the accounting officer and the permanent secretaries and the heads of the departments if they strengthen their control system in general. And so sometimes you may need to look at the rules that have been established and add to those rules. and just to strengthen the control system altogether. It's about controlling the environment, the accounting environment, your expenditure environment, your revenue collection environment, to the good of the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you do follow-up reviews or just follow-up reviews on things like this, not waiting for the annual audit to be done, but for critical issues, say, okay, in 3 months' time, I'm going to go back and look or whatever and see what progress has been made?
Part of our audit program is really the responses that we have received in response to the management letters with some of the issues that we have risen here, because not everything is material enough to raise here. Part of our standard procedure is to go back and verify that the corrective action that is deemed to would be taking place or have been agreed to take place have taken place. And if it have not, you generally would find its way back again in the audit report in the subsequent year.
I know that the Attorney General's office is present, and I don't want them to feel that we had them here for no cause. So I have 2 questions to ask. One is, with regard to this impasse between the Auditor General's office and the Board of Inland Revenue, what is the perception of the Attorney General's office of what is to be done?
Good morning.
Morning.
We would have submitted an opinion from the Attorney General, and basically it's indicating that we are advising that the Board of Inland Revenue, as well as the Ministry of Finance, that they would need to sort this out and issue instructions to the Ministry of the Attorney General in case that we need to provide any update of the laws. So basically, we are still awaiting their instructions.
Okay. Could I ask, the CPC is represented here, right? The big issue in this is the privacy issue and the protection of the privacy issue. And the other issue is the access to information to do the analysis, which gives credibility to the public accounts and therefore facilitates action in this regard to ensure that we have credible and authentic public records. Can the CPC, in your opinion at this point, and I know you're not yet drafting legislation for that, but at this point, can this matter be resolved in legislative drafting that would address both issues, both the public need and the private need?
Yes, Chair. It would require, it can be done. We have in recent times in a number of pieces of legislation, for example, the TIEA factor made sure that confidentiality of information coming into the Board of Inland Revenue in relation to persons who have foreign accounts in the territory and that ought to be reported, that information is protected and is not goes back out. There are penalties even for, in the amendment that was done last year in 2018 to the Income Tax Act, where the FIU and the FIB, the police, were given the ability to get some information from the Board of Inland Revenue. That information is also under confidentiality, and there is a penalty, some serious penalties. I believe $300,000 on summary conviction and $500,000 on indictment for using information that was given for purposes not for other purposes. So I believe it can be achieved, but there has to be some agreement between the board and the Auditor General.
Okay, so it's resolvable by discussion?
Yes.
All right. Okay, and another thing I wanted to ask Attorney General's office, on page 29, there is an unreconciled difference of $1.417555 between the statement of receipts and disbursements and the records of the Treasury Division. I mean, my instinct tells me that this is just a paper issue, but is there an explanation?
Yes, Chair. We would have prepared a response to the Auditor General, because what we did find is that it was an error on our part, where we would have collected information pertaining to funds that would be disbursed in this fiscal rather than last fiscal.
The year before.
Yeah, so we have an entire breakdown of the error.
Okay, and this has been passed on to the
Yes.
Auditor General?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And there were some issues here related to, I'm just going to close up now. I'm not going to spend too much time here. We've run a full couple of hours, and I don't want to waste anybody's time. But I want to go back to Customs and Excise Division, which is that, I mean, there are 2 or 3 references here to leakages and irreconcilable figures with Customs, and then the ICT issue, which does not make for easy reconciliation of numbers in the Customs Department. Do you have any comments on this? I mean, do you all still use paper? I thought we had gotten to the point where Customs you have Exchequer. I thought you had more technology involved in the Customs operation and so on. Why is this thing such a thing? Are we still using paper there?
Chair, yes, we are still using paper, but this difference.
You are still? Are you saying that?
Still using
okay.
paper.
All right. So it's still paper-based.
It's still paper-based.
Right.
Because we need to have that.
So that means you have a set of paper files.
Files all, yeah.
So when you have to reconcile something, you have to go.
You have to go to the station, get the relevant paper in order to.
Okay.
And this difference of 102 approximately million, it was between the statement of receipts and disbursement and the digital cash book.
Well, the difference was about 9
the treasury
million,
card.
right? Is that correct?
Sorry?
The difference was about 9 million that was not reconciled. Is that correct? I'm not on the same page you on, but I think I have that from memory.
It's on page 30, 3.8. It's 2 amounts there. You have the 102.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we had is that the treasury cards, right? There was they were presented. They bore the treasury stamp and official signature, but they were not reflected on the final treasury cards that were received. So that process has to be completed by the Comptroller of Accounts.
Yeah, but why wasn't it completed to the tune, well, to put the Auditor General in a position not to have to write this down? And
yes, again, that's
secondly, it's not $102, it's $102 million.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know, I mean, can this be justified by any explanation? Can I hear it?
Well, the Comptroller of Accounts may be able to explain.
Could you help me with this? I find this kind of
Chair, I cannot say offhand without looking at the actual records.
Well, could we have a written response to explain this? How you could have a difference of 102 million between 2 documents?
Yes, you can. But
okay. And that, suppose, I mean, would we have known if the Auditor General did not flag this? Auditor General, I'm asking you. We would not have known.
No, you would not have known.
What would have happened to the 102 million? I'm asking my questions innocently, but I'm being very serious.
We would hope that eventually it would have been reconciled.
Okay. So it would have been like a book problem that would have been eventually resolved. But you are hoping. There's no way of knowing for sure. Is that correct? I need to have you say, you are the Auditor General. Huh?
Chair, if I
You
may,
are hoping, but there is no guarantee. All right? Could I have a formal explanation of that? It may be not a big deal, but it could be a big deal, and I just want to know what the facts are. Okay, could we have that? All right? Permanent Secretary, I thought you might, were you going to say something about this? Yeah.
But eventually, Chairman, the books must be reconciled, and
Yes.
and this will be taken care of. Yeah.
And it would have?
It would have been. It would show up eventually.
Eventually,
Yeah,
you would find it.
Of course, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all right. And what about the other smaller amount, 10 sub-items totaling 171 million? Same thing? But you realize all of this is because you're still doing this stuff on paper? I'm not saying that that is the only reason, because you can make mistakes on a computer too, and you can fail to make an entry, but I think the chances are less because you'll pick it up on your screen. Not so? So a key thing in all of this is the ICT system. I don't think we can, I mean, I don't know, Permanent Secretary, is there something that we can do on the financial side of this? I know you deal with the ISMAS, but this thing with customs and immigration and so on, this is not the first time this thing coming up. You know, we've written many recommendations on this from 2016 going forward.
Well, Chairman, I don't know if I can say this, but if we implement the Tobago Revenue Authority and we combine the customs and the function of customs
The ICT element of it.
Of course, it must help.
Okay, well, I mean, there's the collection side of that and the integration side of that, which you're talking about, but of course there are other issues with the authority, which do not have to do with accounts or accounting, which are the source of the problem. I don't think anybody is against the integration to get the monies due to the state, but there are other issues which we need not bring in this particular forum. Okay, all right then. Any other member, any questions, any other questions? All right, well, I've kept you here a long time, but as you realize, this is an important document. Auditor General, we may have some further questions for you, which we might ask on paper, or if necessary. Well, we know that the Auditor General is also always there. The office is always represented as we do the accounts with the various people. So we are thankful for that. But if we need to bring you back, we'll ask. So, I want to take the opportunity now to bring this matter to a close and to take the meeting to adjournment. But before I do so, I do want to emphasize that this ICT business is a serious matter, and I really think it has to do with the difference between being a modern country with a relatively sophisticated bureaucracy and a backward country that's still there with pencil and pen and paper doing things and pretending to be a progressive country in today's world. I mean, we just cannot continue to do this, man. I mean, I think it really, I think it's kind of shameful for Trinidad and Tobago to be in this position. I'm being quite frank with you. We have to have a ICT-based internet system that allows us to conduct modern public business in the interests of the customers of public service, which are the citizens of the country. And it's 1.4 million people. You know, as I was saying in the parliament the other day, that is a little village in Nigeria. It's a little village in India. It's a little village in China. 1.4 million people is not any big shakes. So, I mean, if other countries can do it, we can do it. And I really think we have to break the back of this ICT problem that we have here in the public sector. And it is also holding back business, by the way. It affects the private sector. It holds back business. It holds back the relationship of the public sector with the rest of the society. And it causes a big problem for us. And you can't even reconcile the accounts. You have to do it by paper. I mean, it doesn't make sense at all, not in this day and age. And, well, the other issues, some of them are perennial issues which keep coming up. And I think I'm going to take a little interest in this, and when we do the report, and try to focus on those things that have come up in the reports from 2015, 16, 17, etc. I think we did that, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018, when we did the report. We did our report to Parliament. But I think we need to do that again and highlight the things which keep recurring that doesn't seem to want to go away, and really, what can I say, subverts the entire development process of the country. And we've got to get those things right and try and find a way of resolving some of those issues. And I want to take this opportunity now to thank the Auditor General and the members of her department. We thank you for your continuing support, because we lean heavily on you, and we know that you're very responsive to our needs, and we're grateful for that. The Ministry of Finance and the Permanent Secretary leading his team, I want to say thank you very much. I mean, the attempt here was not to put stress on the Ministry of Finance in any way, but given the major role of the Ministry of Finance in so many of these things that have to do with money, and the importance of it to the Auditor General's report, it really, there's no way that we could have avoided engaging you on some of these issues, and we'll have the opportunity to deal with that again. The Board of Inland Revenue Chairman, I want to thank you for engaging us on this issue. I hope you'll continue the discussions and try and resolve the issue in the public interest. I understand your point of view. I want you to let you know that I do not appreciate your concerns, and I take your point very seriously, that the basis of taxation policy in a democratic society is voluntary compliance with taxation laws. And I understand that, but I also understand the Auditor General's point of view, which is that how can you look after the public accounts and give it the scrutiny that it deserves, and ultimately the accuracy that you need, if you don't have access to information? So we have to try and find a resolution to some of those issues. Comptroller of Accounts, I thank you very much. I know that you're under a little pressure because of the issues having to do with reconciliation of numbers and so on, but I mean, that's why we're here. That's what the job of this committee is about. And the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, we thank you also for being here and for complying with, well, giving us the answers to some of our questions, and also you from the CPC's office. I know that the CPC's office is Parliament rather than AG, but I know it works closely with the legislative process of the Attorney General's office. I want to thank the members of the public who are present and all members who came here in support of this exercise and were ready to ask questions and to volunteer information. And I want to especially thank the media for being here. Remember, this is a public education event in addition to whatever else it is. And it is important for the public to understand how their government works. It is important for the public to understand what accountability means. It is important for the public to understand what their role is and what their demands can be in a democratic system. And for that reason, it is important for them to understand what goes on in government, what is right, what is wrong, what can get better, what can be corrected. And that is one of the purposes of this committee. Okay? So I want to thank you all for coming, and we hope that the media will help us in the transmission of some of the content of today's proceedings so that the public will better understand what we are about here. Thank you very, very much, and of course, thanks to my colleagues and the parliamentary staff who always work diligently on their part of the responsibility. Thank you all very much.